My name is Monira Foundation, and on behalf of the Austrian Cultural Forum New York, I would like to warmly welcome you and thank you all for coming. Tonight's event is an artist talk in the framework of Right Time, Right Place, an exhibition that is currently on show at Messner Contemporary, and that is examining the concept of public space. I was lucky enough to attend the exhibition opening on Saturday, and I can highly recommend to all of you to visit this exhibition. We are delighted to host this conversation by MELANIE KRESS, Associate Curator of the High Line, with KATHARINA GRUZEI, Artist and Curator of Right Time, Right Place, Ysabel Pinyol-Blasi, Executive Director and Curator at Monira Foundation, and participating artists Eginhartz Kanter, and Messner, Nowacek, and Stefanos Tsivopoulos. Thank you for letting us enjoy this program at the Austrian Cultural Forum. And now I give the floor to KATHARINA GRUZEI.
Good evening. Thank you very much. My name is KATHARINA GRUZEI. I'm an artist and I'm the curator of Right Time, Right Place. It's a great pleasure for me to be here tonight, and it's wonderful to have a panel of experts from the curatorial side and from the artistic side. I'm very excited that we are going to talk about the artistic creation of projects in public space tonight. And I would kindly like to ask to thank a couple of institutions that supported us, and also a couple of people. So I would like to kindly thank the Austrian Cultural Forum for the support of having me in the house in August when I prepared this show, especially Melina Ciamos, Aida Balamaci, that I see back there, and also Michael Haider, who is not here today, but also my great pleasure to meet you, and thanks to you, Susanne Keplinger-Schlesinger. You've just taken over the Austrian Cultural Forum 2 weeks ago. I remember the day because it was pouring rain. It was not a very welcoming day, but I think the more New York is welcoming, and I wish you a very, very great time here, and I'm sure we'll have a nice discussion together with you later on. I owe my thankfulness also to the other supporters of this project, the Austrian Ministry of Culture, the regions of Carinthia and Upper Austria that we are affiliated with, the city of Linz, for example, and my wonderful and great collaborator, Ysabel Pinyol-Blasi, and the Monira Foundation. Thank you so much for supporting us and for having our show. Along with you, there is also a fantastic team of hands-on women, like one of you, Anne Montges and Cara O'Brien, as well as Diego Roque, who will help us with the video of this recording tonight. And I would also like to thank Spencer and Jorge, and I forgot the third name, I'm so sorry. Miguel. I knew it was a M. Last but not least, I want to express my highest gratitude and appreciation to the artists that participated in this project. It's quite a special project, and it's very exciting, and all of you made a huge effort to produce artwork in a very short time, and also outside of the regular studio space. So once we're going into public space, it's get a bit out of control and exciting, and it's an adventure, and we are amidst people, and it's a wonderful thing to do. So thank you for your hard work on this project. I want to name the artists because some of the artists are also in the audience. I couldn't put more people on the stage. I hope you excuse that, but I want to name all the artists of the show. The show is going till the 13th of November, and the participants are Charlotte Beckett and Roger Sire. Roger is right here. The great Valley Export, Gelatin, Marlene Hausecker, Eginhartz Kanter right here, Joshua Liebowitz over here, Luisa Mager left of him, Anne Messner, Rainer Neubauer, Nancy Nowacek, Jose Pazos, Octavia Schreiner, and Stefanos Tsivopoulos. Thank you so much for participating. I want to give you a short outline of the exhibition to advertise that you're coming to Jersey, an area that is absolutely fantastic, a wonderful neighborhood with the best Indian food and wonderful people that are very welcoming. Please take the PATH train and don't miss out on Jersey City and the Mana Contemporary. Public space has become a highly contested territory in the past decades. The term itself is a fluid concept that is constantly being redefined by its intricate cultural, historical, ecological, and political implications. Right Time, Right Place is an artist-curated exhibition that showcases works by international and established and upcoming artists with different approaches to the public sphere. Issues regarding its use and accessibility are ever more relevant as privatization reaches a peak in cities such as New York, while the COVID crisis has only further influenced an existing zeal towards the regulation of public space, underlining critical aspects of this discussion. Artists around the globe are taking to the public sphere, eschewing artist-designated areas and traditional venues to connect with a wider audience, not necessarily represented by gallery visitors. Others are involving the sphere in their practice and containing it in other media. Our show displays various artistic strategies, pointing out the potential of the public space as a social and a political arena. Indeed, some works included question the fine boundaries between private and public, often blending them. Right Time, Right Place revolves around informal and legally adjacent art practices that challenge the understanding of limitations. Furthermore, it underscores that the limits of art projects, activism, artivism, and community building intersect, and that social change and artistic practice are often intertwined. Curfews and new roles of conduct in particular have changed the relationship to public space for urban residents. Efforts to maintain order and cleanliness have significantly restricted the scope of action for artists. These boundaries call once more for their exploration. So that was the outline idea for the exhibition that I started to think of in 2019. I came to New York with a stipend of the Ministry of Cultures of Austria. For 3 months I was a lucky resident of the ISCP located in Brooklyn. And after my stay, I selected a group of American and of Austrian and New York-based artists who are interested in working in public space or containing it in their artworks. Then the pandemic happened. Right time, right place became wrong time and wrong place. So we were starting to discuss on Zoom, and we had 2 years to get to know each other, show each other artworks, and exchange ideas, knowledge, impressions, and experiences. Finally, together with 3 more artists from Austria, we arrived almost 3 weeks ago to realize the artworks that we were speaking about, or to get out and see if they work at all. So that was a massive situation for the artists to arrive in a new place and so quickly realize the artworks, and everyone did wonderful. I would like to thank the artists for their efforts to realize their thrilling projects under such adventurous conditions. The outcome is stunning, and I'm very proud of our exhibition. Please come to Jersey and visit the show at Mana Contemporary. It's open Monday to Friday, 11 to 5. So 10 of 14 artworks were especially produced for Right Time, Right Place the weeks before, and they are presented together with already existing work of Gelatin, Valley Export, Rainer Neubauer, and Stefanos Tsivopoulos. Thank you, and thanks also to the other artists for lending these beautiful, wonderful artworks for the show. I'm very glad. And I would like to quickly name the other participants of the panel before I hand over my microphone to you, Ysabel. So Stefanos Tsivopoulos is right here. Thank you so much that we can show your beautiful video here tonight. MELANIE Kress is Associate Curator at the Highline. It's a great pleasure to have you here as a moderator tonight. Thank you for saying yes to doing that. And
I can say that.
Thank you so much. Eginhartz Kanter, who will quickly introduce us into a project he curated as an artist a while ago in Austria. Wonderful Messner, who will surprise us with something. And the great Nancy Nowacek that does one thing that I find so important not to leave out. In her artwork, she's making the water surfaces a topic where art and public space can happen. And now I would like to also introduce you, Ysabel Pinyol-Blasi. She's Chief Curator and Director at Monira Foundation. It has been such a pleasure working with you. It is amazing what we were able to do on the fly. We fly Europe and back, and it was incredible working with you. I very much appreciated it. Thank you for hosting this project.
Thank you. Thank you, Katharina. Thank you, Katharina. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Austrian Cultural Forum. Thank you to all the artists that have made this exhibition possible. I know everybody has worked really hard to make this happen. So, my name is Ysabel Pinyol-Blasi, and I'm the Executive Director and Curator of the Monira Foundation. The Monira Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3 public charity that I started 3 years ago after being the chief curator at Mana Contemporary for the last 10 years. So very quickly, Monira's mission is to expand the reach and quality of art available to the public. We do this through artist residencies, exhibitions, and public programs. One of the main reasons why I was very excited when the proposal that Katharina was putting together, that actually came through Nancy, because she and I had worked on something else during COVID. When the proposal of Right Time, Right Place came to my attention, I immediately gravitated towards, and I think one of the reasons was because I was able to quickly understand the importance of public space nowadays, and more than ever. In our situation, Monira Foundation is given a space, right, by Mana Contemporary, which is a private organization. And what we do with Monira is we make that spaces that are private, usually would be occupied by tenants, we open them up and we make them accessible to the public. So that was one of the main reasons why I thought it was a very interesting approach. I also, of course, think that at the moment that you take art out of the gallery context, by default, you're making it much more accessible and communal, and the voice of the artist just becomes much more democratic, just by the simple fact that it's just reach a much larger audience. Anyways, I don't want to elaborate too much on that. I have a few notes that perhaps I can add later on if anybody has a few questions. But yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Melanie, I'm handing over to you. Thank you so much for doing the moderation.
It's my pleasure. We'll keep this over here.
Keep it over here.
We'll do half and half. You guys can have that one, I'll have this one. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see so many familiar and new faces here, and I'm so thrilled to be joined in this very New Yorkly dressed group of artists and curators, I have to say. Next time we'll try to wear a little bit more color, but really I feel like even just sitting here for the last couple of minutes, these incredible people are artists, and we're going to think a lot about public space and about barriers, but this is also a group of troublemakers, and I have the unfortunate task of also keeping everyone to time. So if you see me being rude, I have been assigned this task.
Asking permission used to be a simple process. It maybe one or two steps, but it has slowly become more bureaucratized and controlled. And that also is the bureaucratization and the control is sort of an inhibitor in terms of creative energy. So that's just a simple answer.
That's a great answer.
I just want to say one thing.
Yeah, please.
Willoughby Sharp was surrounded by a huge community of incredible women artists. I would say that that was an intentional action on his part. Excuse me.
I'm glad you said that, for saying that. I just wanted to add on to what Anne was saying, because I was actually born a rule follower and get very uncomfortable when I break the rules. And working on the water is actually incredibly dangerous. And certainly for some of the projects I was thinking about in that diagram I showed you was for a proposed bridge between Brooklyn and Governor's Island, right? Like, I mean, it is a matter of life and death, right? What I have learned, right, is that permission nowadays is another word for risk aversion. Permission is just is like a nicer way to say, probably not, but if you cough up the $30,000 in insurance so that we're not liable, we'll give you the permission, right? It is a soft but very, very potent form of power. And so I think now we really forget permission.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference of staging your work, thinking about that's a very American context, right? Like in Greece versus in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the big question is who owns the public space? And the public space, let's say in the United States, is not owned by its people or its citizens. It's definitely commodified, commercialized. So that's actually, there is though the other side that says that 2011, 2010, we had the incredible experience of Occupy Wall Street, where Zuccotti Park was completely occupied. And that was something that nobody saw coming. And the way it happened, it was tremendous. People overnight, they congregated and they took over space that wasn't even scheduled to be their space or what exactly was happening. I mean, there was an intention, political intention, and then slowly kind of manifested in occupying space. And of course, the history of Occupy Wall Street, it goes to so many different directions and extends the depths, and there's so much knowledge and story in there, but it's an incredible example to make us think that there are all these limitations, but then again, as we see now happening in Iran, in Tehran, where women are taking over the public space, and they're paying a huge price for doing that. So there's a kind of a balance there that it says, how much are you willing to risk in order to claim your space in the public domain, your voice. And this is something that in Western democracies, that seems that has been extremely controlled, diminished. I think we sort of tend to think there are different outlets, social media, where we can express what we think or sort of create our networks and resistance, etc. But at the end of the day, also through artworks, for example, mentioning my that piece and how it sort of worked out in Greece and how it was here, I think there wasn't a big difference. It went through a huge, there was a lot of red tape in both places because they're symbols of power. It's like the Greek parliament in Athens, that we had to go through police, we had to go through security, through everything in order to do that, and here as well. So I wouldn't say that there was such a big difference.
I'd love to shift to talk about audience, because one of the interesting things in your film that happens is it also reveals the way that everyone else is behaving in that place. And Eginhartz, I'd actually like to ask you about audience and to think about, because there are many, we're talking about physical spaces, right? And we're talking about human beings, and we're talking about public. We're talking about public space, which is owned or moderated by whoever the governing body might be, commerce or government or else. But we're also talking about people and how they're functioning. And they might be a public, they might be an audience. How do you think about audience in the project that you staged? If they are the passersby, or if they're completely removed and really the storytelling is the most important part and we are all the audience for the project?
But of course, there is not really an audience for this project in the first hand. There's this media coverage. There was this media coverage of our press release. So this is how people got to know about the project. And there was, of course, also the little catalog. And so in first hand, there was not really an audience, but this is something we also took in advance. We took into consideration. This was totally clear for us. And in general, for these kind of projects, I always think there's like the art and public space projects that I do, or my artist friends. I always think they are like, they exist in two ways. Like there's passerbys, they just see them, and so they will witness a performance or something like this. And there's of course also very often an intended final photograph or an intended final video, something like this. So this, at least for me, it's always two artworks actually in some way. Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit more about people? Because I feel like you really brought us here in your text. And I'm really stuck on this interest in people who are in a space out of necessity. Two of my favorite public art programs are the Art on the Underground program in London and the Art in the Subway in New York City. But maybe could you say more about that and how a group of people shift in social contract between community and public and audience and maybe other things that I'm not naming?
Well, I know that in thinking about the text, it was coming out of the recent experience of doing these sticker postings for the project I did for this show, and realizing how much, I already knew this, but it was so evident in the photos I took that everyone's in public space looking at their cell phones. And I was always interested in I'll use the word aesthetic experience that would happen in a place where it was unexpected and that the people who would have the experience would somehow alter their day in a type of poetic way. And so when I was writing this text, I was really thinking about the urban space, a place where there are lots of people and we don't know who we're next to, and we don't really want to be next to anybody. And actually, I love, my favorite place in the world is the subway. I love the subway. And I do. But, I was thinking about the action of ACT UP. Similarly, in front of the White House, with the throwing of the ashes, that was social, very social, because it was moving, and it was very personal, but there was no permission. There was an AIDS demonstration against the inactivity. I guess it was, they showed the AIDS quilt. It was at the same time. And so there was an agreement with some of the ACT UP members that they would march to the White House and throw the ashes over the fence. So that's sort of an interesting way of engaging that same space, because it is a political space. What else? What did you ask me?
Great question. No, I asked you about audience, but I think that this is so important, but also to see the barricades that are in front of the White. You can't even get close enough to be able to have an action like that now, and for many different layers of reasons. I want to talk about barriers also. But Nancy, first, I'd like you to talk a little bit about Audience on the Waterfront, because there are, if anyone doesn't know, there is a fascinating group of artists who are doing very different kinds of practices on the waterfront, and you will often encounter them by accident on the waterfront. But if you can talk a little bit about audience as you're working on the waterfront versus storytelling, and then I'd love to transition to talk a little bit about barriers.
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. We were talking a little bit earlier, about how, okay, so it is legal to be in a boat on the water, but that presupposes a huge amount of resources, right? Like you either have to be somebody who owns a boat, or somebody who knows how to use a boat, or has the time and the resources to find somebody that has a boat and knows how to use a boat, which is, used to be de rigueur in New York City. Everybody knew how to use a boat, and most people had boats, pre-industrial New York. So it's a really interesting audience to work on the water, because working on the water often means working illicitly. It often means, gentle trespassing, light trespassing. So the audience is often as few people as possible, right? The audience is often like the birds or the garbage. And for the piece, one of the pieces I made for the show, knowing all the illegalities of working on the water, I made a plan with a co-conspirator. I said, okay, meet me at Brooklyn Bridge Park at 5 a.m. because I don't think the staff will be circulating yet in the golf carts, and I am dragging 4 cement blocks in a grocery cart and a giant 5-foot-long box. Like, I am not just out for a jog, and I'm driving it into the park. And it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and there's somebody toodles by in a golf cart. And I was like, Jesus. So we had to go. An audience of 1. Well, thankfully, he didn't notice me. So we're trying to work without audience as much as possible. But then once the project was up, everyone and their brother, right? Anyone who is enjoying this public asset is an audience. And so there's the kind of, who's the intended audience and who is the absolutely not ever audience. And I think that's really interesting, right? What audience do you want to draw, and what audience do you want to avoid? And so I'll just say it like that.
Can I ask something?
Please.
Something that is very interesting also to watch artists doing artwork in public space. So there are a lot of ephemeral projects. How do you deal with it? How did you make your decision to leave the flag there? I know that I've been following this process of you making this incredible, beautiful flag. You worked for weeks on it. So there is this decision, also Eginhartz can respond to it, or you, Anne, that you put out an artwork in the public space. How do you make a decision if you let it be there, if you have it vandalized, if you have it removed, if you record it, you photograph it? Do you want to avoid to have people change it? Does the water arrive if you can't reach it anymore? It's too heavy to get it back out. Can you comment on that decision?
I really loved this flag so much. I wanted to install it, and I wanted to photograph it, and then I wanted to deinstall it and not have anybody see. And I realized very quickly that was going to be impossible, because I actually installed the work in the water, and I was chest deep in the water at 5:30 in the morning. And I did it then, and that was at low tide. I did it so the water would come, so it'd be harder to get to. But there was so much activity, only a few hours in terms of park police and, lots of walkie-talkies. I had to walk away from her and just, well, okay, Sarah, I don't know what happened. Just because I wasn't really interested in getting arrested. But it's hard. It's hard to leave your darlings behind, but I'm really glad that I did. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about this.
I was just thinking, there are lots of stories. Yeah. Listening to you talk about the High Line and the padlock and the permit running out. And then I was just thinking back, like, so many stories, right? And I think that is one of the things about working without permission. It's not just in the public realm, but you're out in the weather. Right?
Oh my God.
But that stuff happens, and that maybe that's part of it, that you leave it up to chance. I did an exhibition in a subway car. I removed, and it was pre-planned, because I removed all of the ads from the subway car and replaced it with black and white photographs that were printed the same size of photographs that had been taken in subway cars during rush hour. And the installation of the show, which began with removal of the ads, all happened with the public watching, because we were doing it in the subway car while it was moving. And no one stopped us, no one got angry, everyone watched, and it became a conversation piece. But then, when it was all done, you know, took the requisite photographs of the installation and left the car, and the exhibition continued. And I have no idea what happened to it. But that's just one story. But there's, what?
It's a traveling exhibition.
Yeah, traveling exhibition. That's a good title. But I think that probably all of us have those stories, you know, that if you have a history of that type of working, stuff happens. Like someone might leave dead chickens inside your illicit sculpture every night and you don't know why, or things like that. It goes on.
Yes, and just said it's totally nice to see how things then go their own way. The artworks, you set them out and leave them on themselves. And yeah, I have several artworks that I made that existed in public space without permission for several years also. And they were rotting away, and I sometimes went there and made new photographs, new installation shots, and it was also nice to document this process, because then some of them, I mean, one text installation I made in Linz, it was not, you couldn't read it anymore, there was just these fragments of text, so it was even more mysterious than before, because before it was Cyrillic, so already only a few people could read it, and afterwards there were just a few remaining Cyrillic letters. And, yeah. And I really like this aspect of the, and also if in my work generally I also work with the wind, with rain, etc. So these factors also come into action and change the appearance of the work, or sometimes destroy it quickly. And yeah, this is what I totally like it, and don't have storage problems. So only.
I love the idea of rotting public artwork. Disintegrating away. Well, there are so many rules, and I'd love to hear if y'all have questions, but there are so many rules, I mean, around public art, right? And New York City is on the High Line. All of our commissions stay on view for 12 months because it's the longest you can have what's called a temporary public artwork on view in a park in New York City. Once it's longer than 12 months, it becomes a monument. It's a different group of people who review it. And a lot of that is because the Parks Department can't afford to maintain artworks that would be donated to the Parks Department. So the rotting public artwork is the concern that determines this rule, right? And so much of what we think about when we're commissioning new works is how to make sure that it will last for 12 months. And so leaving things behind and letting them transform. And this element of chance, I think, is really beautiful. Do you all have any? Yeah, please.
You used to be able to get a permit from the Department of Transportation to do work on sidewalks, but the permit was never longer than 6 months.
DOT is more strict than parks. And these are the things you have to learn. Do y'all have any questions for anyone up here that we haven't touched on? Yeah, please.
I'll do this. I have a question for Anne. When did you do the subway piece? What year was it?
Sometime in the late 1970s. I date things according to what I think I was doing at a certain year. In the late 70s, I spent about 5 years only working in the subway system. I found it to be a nice, beautiful, peaceful place to spend time thinking.
Do you think you could do that piece today?
I'm a lot older than I was, and I don't have the same issues I had then. But no, I've thought a lot about it. I worked with a collective of 5 people. The collective was called ART, Artist Reaction Team, and we did a postcard project against the war in Iraq. We had 5 postcards, 100,000 of each, and we distributed them in the subway system. And one thing I can say about that is a subway car is a trapped audience. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of conversations, and we distributed all, it was 500,000 postcards through the subway system over a number of weeks. And it was sort of a wonderful experience. One thing I was thinking before, I'm sorry, I just go. One thing I was thinking before that's never spoken about is, we're looking at all these video and photographs of work and outside and in the public, and we're looking at what's being pictured, but what's never being pictured is that there is a camera present. Mm-hmm. And I think that, right, because you never see a photograph of the camera unless someone's behind the camera person, or if a camera person is the work. But I think, like what you were doing in front of the White House, there were camera people there documenting it. So it wasn't like there were those couples doing things without the sort of official knowledge that this is something being filmed. And I just wanted to point that out.
Well, documentation and ephemerality, right, often go hand in hand. Any question?
Yes, I actually had a question that's a little bit connected to that for Stefanos. You said that you did an open call for people to participate. It seemed to me like they are kind of experienced in their movement and like in performance. Did you direct your open call for people who are in a performance sphere? First question, and the second, you mentioned you were dealing with securities there. How you were dealing on spot? Or you in advance organize things, talking to them, and did you rehearse with the performance? How long did you rehearse this work?
Yeah. Thank you. To start with, the open call was in Washington, D.C. We invited people from the arts, different communities, a lot of local communities. It was also word of mouth. We talked a lot to people we knew there, and we received a lot of interest. And I think half of the people who expressed the interest, they ended up being part of the project. I mean, at the end of the day, it was more or less like technicalities that, the time and, people that didn't, they had like conflictual schedules, etc. That's why because we wanted to include as many people as possible. Ideally, for every couple would be new people to be part of it. So there was a lot of space for that, for a lot of participants. The way, we rehearsed, actually we talked a lot about how to work on the performance. As you saw, almost every couple, they had a completely different way of performing, and that was part of the whole idea. Each couple remained a couple throughout the course of the day, so they were performing always the same sort of ritual. And in regards to security, yes, there was a lot of red tape, both with the security of the White House, but also with police. And we're working on it for about 3-4 months. And the date was set. It was the only date that we were able to perform that. And with regards to the security on location, there were several issues. They're not presented in the short video documentation, which, by the way, it's not the work, it's just the video documentation and nothing more. But we encountered a lot of issues with both, because, you know, at the height of the day, there were a lot of schools, there were a lot of tourists, it was chaos right in front of the gates. But the performance kept on going, and somehow what it created was this sort of like conflict, you know, with the other kind of rituals that they're happening right in front of the house, you know, taking pictures, posing and all that, and then all of a sudden you had this performance going on, this very silent, peaceful movement of these two bodies, and you get a little bit of a glimpse of the sort of like interruption that it was creating in the flow of, you know, the banal, continuous reality of every day. I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we have one more question in the front and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. I don't want to hold the discussion any longer, but first of all, thank you for this very thought-provoking discussion. My name is Susanne Kepler-Schwesinger. I'm the director of this forum. I just arrived 2 weeks ago and I'm rediscovering a city that I love, that is New York. And I really believe city, not only Manhattan, but also the other boroughs. And one thought that came up in my mind is that can you see the difference of working with authorities before COVID started and afterwards? Just an observation from Vienna, and maybe Ms. Gruzei agrees with me. I have the feeling that authorities are getting a little bit more relaxed about the open space, because I remember in May 2020 when people were just locked in the lockdown and desperate, and a lot of energy was bottled up in small apartments. Main arteries of Vienna were opened up. We call them Begegnungszonen. Very long streets that lead out towards the Viennese woods, to the green areas, in order to encourage people to just move on the streets. And I think that had a very positive effect on society, because all sorts of things all of a sudden happened. You got to know new neighbors, children were playing. We finally won the war against the cars, and there were fights between pedestrians, joggers, and adamant drivers of big cars. I very much enjoyed this. Of course, things developed backwards in many respects, but I think we have more leeway now. When I now look at the streets of Manhattan, I see these interesting restaurants with silk flowers and stuff. So I wonder, is there also more tolerance towards art in public space? Because obviously these interesting installations of fading silk flowers are being accepted. I think they are eyesores, but you know, in the eye of the beholder.
Maybe I do a quick response. It's very interesting what COVID did to the cities, because from one moment to the other, a utopia happened. And we experienced again how the skies look like, how we feel when all the noise from the streets is gone. We discovered something that couldn't have been possible without the pushing the stop button. And I think that brought a lot of life quality on one hand back. I think we don't need to discuss about the downside of COVID, which obviously we all experienced in different ways. But I think it brought up the question of who owns the public space. That's the main question that we are also elaborating on, like what can we do, why do we have to ask, and so on. And it opened up this utopia. And just like you, I experienced the city 3 years after, and I also thought, wow, there are so many outside areas that were created in New York. That's possible, but still that is commercial. So it did not open at all any opportunities for artists, I guess, which in my mind would be areas that are not designated to anything, that are not telling you have to sit here, you have to play here, there is water here, you can make sound, like not this Disneyfication of cities where you feel like you're an adult but you're on a playing ground and authority tells you how to behave. But that's also something that was immediately my eye, that I thought, wow, there are less parking lots and there is this outside space. But from your experience as New York, people living in New York, did you experience any changes in the public space that is really something that could be a playground or an area or a liberation or a possibility for articulation that is not connected to commercial and commercial idea?
I didn't experience this myself, but I really felt like rooftops became that space once again. I mean, oftentimes landlords say, don't go on the roof, there's, all of these protections, for some obvious reasons, but it seemed that a lot more life actually went to the top of buildings as much as it went out into the streets. And, I found that really quite beautiful. But just so that the city is now creating a whole new set of policies and regulations and permits for those sidewalk or those street restaurants. So not even commerce is getting a break now, right? Like it was all a temporary alleviation, but it's the rules are back. Anne, you wanna get in there?
Well, nothing's easy, right? I was just thinking one of the things about that time, I had actually moved from the Lower East Side to Sunset Park, and then COVID happened, and I was in not my old neighborhood. But what really surprised me, I think, was how, and I don't know what this has to do with making art in public space, but on the other hand, we do work that has to do with our experience, ultimately. But, sort of like, well, who remained in the city? And my neighborhood that I moved to is mostly Mexican and Chinese, and they weren't gone, they were here. And so there was this exodus, and then there were the people who remained. And to me, that's sort of always been my audience when I work in public. It's the people who are going to work. Yeah. But I have to, and then, I was just thinking that when there were the Black Lives Matter protests and all the shop owners became very protective of their storefronts and everything was boarded up, then there were certain areas of the city that wanted to have graffiti on the boarded up windows. So, there was all this sort of artist graffiti in Soho. So it's interesting when you think about the tradition. Sorry, I meander, but I do think, though, it's valid. When you think about the tradition of art in urban space, none of us have talked about graffiti, but there's a rich tradition that became police through the 80s, 90s. And then I think that is one of the things that we started to see in COVID was boarded up storefronts, but then this type of gentrified graffiti, you can't call it graffiti, it was gentrified mark making that people had permission. So it's sort of interesting. And then there was the other graffiti, of which there was no permission, and there was a lot of it. So that actually isn't necessarily about COVID, but it is about this sort of use of the urban space and how it's policed or not policed and who gets permission and who doesn't get permission. But I would say that the economic interests in the city are alive and well, and they do like their pedestrian pathways, and they like everything to look relatively civilized. So,
well, I think that was part of this moment, right? Like we talk about the 1970s, and I think that this is a time that's glorified a lot in the contemporary generation of curators and artists without fully, I was not in New York City in the 1970s, without fully recognizing what the entire reality was, right? And a lot of what was happening was, everything that was happening was because of the economic situation of the city, right? And so a lot of that moment in New York was the receding of the economic interests of who was able to leave and the fear of the loss of the economic interest, and then everything came roaring back. Right? And so I was looking for a silver lining, but the image that keeps coming to mind is, so just north of Little Island, Google bought one of the piers that's just to the north. So they own a few square blocks in Chelsea now. And they bought this pier, and a colleague of mine the other day was talking about needing to go check out the new public space on the top of the Google pier, right? So if we're thinking about the generations of New York City and the mayoral generations of New York City, right? We have the economic situation of what Giuliani supposedly cleaned up. We have the movement of Bloomberg into the privatization through making public of the waterways. I work for an institution that's very much a part of that generation. And the next generation that I hope that we're not looking towards, but we might be, is the tech generation, right? And so like the buying of public space that's fully corporate and still has this label on it. That's my complete failure at bringing us to a silver lining. But I want to be mindful of time, and I want to thank you all so much for organizing this really beautiful and inspiring exhibition, for supporting and making space for this conversation and the show, and for making such beautiful work. I'm sure that everyone will stick around a little bit if you all have more questions, but thank you for joining us, and thank you everyone for being here.